Welcome to Stories for Wonderful Children. I'm Dan Wendelin, your host and storyteller. Years ago, I began recording the bedtime stories I told my children every night. Now, we would like to share those stories with you. I hope you enjoy my Stories for Wonderful Children.
Flip-Flop stared down at the great plain of ice, the center of which stood Frostbite's castle. The ice was covered with sanguines. Sanguines were flying around the castle, through the sky above it, were coming down to land. Flippo and Leela stood beside him. Flippo looked over at him and said, "Well, good buddy, that does appear to be a lot of sanguines. Do you happen to have a plan for what we're going to do next, Prince Flip-Flop?" Flip-Flop looked over and smiled, a fierce tiger grin at him. "As a matter of fact," he said, "I do." He opened the bag that he had brought from his trip back to the Elysium and began taking things out. The first things that he took out were a number of metal cans. "Hey now, good buddy, what you got there?" Flippo said. Flip-Flop looked up at him and smiled. "Paint," he said. Some minutes later, the sanguines on the plain looked up to see the sight that they had most wanted to see. Marching down off a nearby cliff was a group of sanguines, probably 10 or 12 of them. In their midst, surrounded by them, was Flip-Flop. He was trying to walk proudly, but he couldn't because he had shackles, which are sort of like handcuffs, made out of ice, between his front paws and between his back paws. The lead sanguine carried in his flipper the cat gem, glowing a dull red. As they approached the mass of sanguines on the plain, some of them called out to them, "Arr!" And the lead sanguine around Flip-Flop called back, "Arr!" And then the sanguines parted, and the group made their way, escorting Flip-Flop to the great ice castle of Frostbite. It took the group quite some time to walk across that vast ice plain. Flip-Flop did his best to hold his head high and to not look worried or scared or defeated. He wanted to do Flibbertigibbet proud and walk like a tiger. They were met at the castle gate by a sanguine larger than any that Flip-Flop had seen before. With a "Arr!" he turned, and the group of sanguines escorting Flip-Flop followed him, jostling Flip-Flop through the halls of the palace. They climbed upstairs and walked along long passageways until two great doors of ice opened on to a great throne room. Around the edges of the throne room there were more sanguine guards, and on the throne itself sat the frost fairy who had caused all the trouble, Frostbite. "We've got you now, Flip-Flop," he said. "Ah, the mighty Prince Flip-Flop. Not so mighty, are you? I'm gonna be so happy when I turn you into a block of ice and send you to Flibbertigibbet to warn him not to interfere in my kingdom anymore. So, my sanguines, tell me, how did you capture him?" Flip-Flop spoke up. He said, "First, I had something I wanted to tell you, Frostbite." The sanguines had escorted him into the very center of the throne room, just in front of the throne. "The prisoner thinks he can speak, huh? Well, fine. What is it you wanted to tell me, Flip-Flop?" And Flip-Flop said, "Well, you know, Frostbite." "You can call me your majesty." Frostbite. "You know, I really enjoy jokes, and I came here because I wanted to tell you one." "A joke, huh? I don't have much use for jokes. Waste of time. But I'll humor you, since you're going to be ice soon anyway. What is your precious joke?" Here's my joke for you. It's a riddle, actually. The riddle is this. When is a sanguine not a sanguine?
What? That makes no sense. Sanguines are always sanguines. What else could a sanguine be?
And Flip-Flop said, a sanguine is not a sanguine when it's a penguin painted white.
What?
Said Frostbite. And as he said that, Flip-Flop flexed his mighty tiger paws, and the shackles of ice burst apart, and the penguins that were all around him, all the penguins that had been painted white, flopped onto their bellies and threw themselves at the sanguine guards around the throne room. At that same moment, Flip-Flop reached into a pouch on his side, got a paw full of itching powder, and tossed it onto Frostbite before Frostbite had a moment to react. "Ah!" said Frostbite, and began to scratch uncontrollably. Then Flip-Flop reached into his other pouch, and he had a remote control, and he pressed the button. The remote control began to hum. And while Frostbite was still itching uncontrollably, Flip-Flop bounded up and grabbed the ice crown off of his head. "Ah!" said Frostbite. "Come back here." Then Flip-Flop said, "Let's go," and he and the sanguines that had been painted white dashed out of the throne room. The sanguines and Frostbite began to give chase, but as they reached the doors of the throne room, Flip-Flop yelled, "Down!" and he and all of the penguins ducked to the ground, and then over their head came the things that Flip-Flop's remote control had summoned, the remote control pies, and they came flying over. Split, 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 split. The pies hit the faces of Frostbite and of the sanguines, and they were covered in cream which froze fast to their faces. Then Flip-Flop and the penguins jumped up and ran out of the throne room, dashing away to get as far away as they could. "That should slow them down a bit," said Flip-Flop. They dashed along the hallway until they came to a door leading to the outside of the castle. They ran out the door and they ran out onto a wall. They saw that they were high above the plain that was still surrounded with sanguines. "Uh-oh," said Flip-Flop. "Not this way, I don't think." Then they turned and they saw that there at the door the sanguines and Frostbite had appeared to chase after them. "What are we going to do now?" Layla said. "Hey, don't worry, Layla. I'm sure Flip-Flop will think of something. You've got another plan, right, Flip-Flop?" Flip-Flop shrugged. He said, "I don't know. I've used up all the tricks in my pouch." He looked down. There on one paw he had the ice crown. He said. "I wonder what this thing does." He put it on his head and immediately made an awful grimace. "Oh," he said, "this is an evil thing, but it's also so powerful." He looked around. While he was wearing the ice crown, he could see the snow and the ice as if he were reading a book. He could see where the ice was strong and the ice was weak. He could see where there was snow in the clouds above. And then he realized that he could use his understanding of that ice and the snow in order to create. And so he grimaced for a moment and then said, "There." And before them, from the side of the castle wall, a great ramp of ice began to congeal out of thin air. It hardened, and he said, "Come on, let's go." The sanguines and Frostbite were right behind them at that point. So Flip-Flop turned, and taking his banana peels that he'd been using to slide on, he tossed them under the first sanguines out on the wall. They stumbled and slipped and fell, and then the other sanguines and Frostbite stumbled over them. It bought the penguins and Flip-Flop just enough time. The first penguins flopped onto the ice ramp and sped off along it. Flip-Flop said, "I don't have my bananas anymore." But 4 penguins threw themselves down on their bellies and they said, "Quick, get on our backs." He leaped onto their backs and they slid off along the ice ramp at full speed. Flip-Flop concentrated as they went, using the power of the ice crown to make more ice ramp form in front of them. He looked back for just a moment and saw that the sanguines had all taken to the air and were chasing them along the ramp. "Uh-oh," he said. He thought for a minute, "How are we going to lose these guys? They're going to chase us right down the ice caves." "We've got to go where they can't," said Layla. "Yeah, good buddy. Got any idea where they can't go?" Flip-Flop said, "Where's the ocean?" Layla pointed, and Flip-Flops began to steer the ice ramp in that direction. Soon he could see it, which was good because the Penguins were right behind them. He could hear their calls. And then he saw the ocean was below them, and so he stopped the ice ramp, and together he and all the penguins fell down, down, down. Splash! The water was freezing cold, and as soon as Flip-Flop hit it, he knew that he couldn't stay under long. He took off the ice crown and let it fall deep, deep, deep into the water. There, he thought, let Frostbite try to get it back from the bottom of the ocean. Then he felt 4 penguins each grab a paw, and they were swimming with him through the water at top speed. He was already starting to feel his teeth chatter and his breath aches in his lungs as he longed to take a breath. But he held his breath, and in a moment they burst out of the water into an ice cave that came up out of the water. "Quick," said the penguins, "we've got to get you warm." The penguins went and gathered some rocks that they had found from some underground hot springs, and they brought them to him, and he laid out on them until his fur started to warm up. "Whew," he said. "Well, we've gotten rid of the ice crown. Now we've just got to hope that that weakens Frostbite's magic enough that Flibbertigibbet can use the Cat's Paw Highway, and I can use the Cat's Paw Highway to get out of here so we can fix the cat gem." "Yeah," said the penguins. "You get nice and warm, and tomorrow we'll head back to the Elysium and see if the Cat's Paw Highway is working." And the next day, they did indeed head back to the Elysium, and tomorrow night I will tell you what happened there.
Thanks for listening to Stories for Wonderful Children. I created today's story, but questions and witty commentary were supplied by my children. The music was created by Brandon Thompson. If you enjoy the show, please tell someone about it or leave a review on your podcast provider. Our website is storiesforwonderfulchildren.com, and you can also find us on most social media. I'm Dan Wendelin, reminding you to tell someone you love a story.